Hello everyone, this is Dr. Geri Puleo, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on why change is chaotic, how transformation leads to chaos. Now, as you can see from this image, people often feel very frustrated, very angry, and very stressed out anytime they're asked to change. It can be changes within an organization, it can be changes within their lives, it can even be changes that they want. It doesn't necessarily have to be changes that are done to them. But what I've discovered is that the level of chaos associated with change is really reflective of whether or not the change is incremental or transformational. So there's two types of change. This simple change of moving from point A to point B is known as incremental change. It's basically adaptive tweaking. So for example, you're asked on a quarterly basis to change the password on your work computer. It's a way to avoid potential hacking in the future, but it's a little change. It might create a little bit of discomfort when you try to remember the new password, but basically you can handle it pretty easily. Incremental or adaptive change relies on short-term actions and reactions. In other words, you're basically moving from point A to point B. So the changes that you're being asked to make are relatively easy. The chaos, therefore, is minimal, if possibly even non-existent. In sharp contrast is the second type of change, where you move from A to B or C and then to D, E, F, then G and H and I, and oh goodness, there's so much stuff after that. This is fundamental change. Fundamental change is transformational change. So in incremental change, when you were asked to change the password on your computer, in fundamental change, you're being asked to learn a complete new software program that your company is going to be launching. In other words, the changes are long-term, and they essentially transform the essence of your daily and long-term actions. Fundamental change has a very difficult implementation, as you can see here with all these different steps that just keep on going. And is that difficulty in implementing the steps needed to create the change that leads to feelings of chaos. But there's something that's really important, and that's the emotional side of change. People react differently to change. Some people are more interested in changing because they believe that they can benefit, but even then they can become stressed out if the change feels to them to be too overwhelming. Other people say, I don't want to change. Why are you forcing me to change? We don't need to change. It's going to make my life more difficult. This may be change resistance, but also it is the type of a foundation which can lead to higher feelings of chaos. So this no man's land of change, or where the chaos occurs, is in something called the transition period. And the transition is very different from the change itself. Change is something that happens outside of you. It's external to you. In other words, it's situational. The transition period is internal. It's your psychological or emotional reactions to the external changes that are happening around you and that are affecting you. In other words, it's the way you feel, your emotions, your perspective, and your values of whether or not the change is even relevant or needed. So the chaos of change is related to not necessarily the change itself, but the chaos of change results from your feelings about the change. So not all change initiatives lead to chaos. Incremental or adaptive changes tend to be accepted by most people. However, it's those fundamental or transformational changes that can create the chaos due to the transition period that all stakeholders in the change initiative must go through. To change the feelings of chaos, you need to modify your perception of what that change initiative means. Take a look at this picture. What do you see? Some people see two people looking at each other, while others instead see a white vase. Same picture, but two very different viewpoints as to what that picture represents. It's the same thing in a change initiative. Your perception of the change will determine whether or not you feel that it's chaos or whether or not it's a growth opportunity. It's the choice is up to you.